Welcome to today's Brand Origin Deep Dive, where we pull back the curtain on the companies that shape our world. You've likely held their products, maybe even watched this video on one. But do you know the turbulent, human story behind the bitten apple? Today, we step into the garage where a myth was forged, a place heavy with the dust of ambition and the faint hum of possibility. It's not just a story of circuits and silicon, it's a narrative of clashing visions, raw energy, and the unpredictable journey from dream to global icon. If you find value in this kind of storytelling, consider liking the video and subscribing. It helps more than you know. And let us know in the comments where you're watching from, or what comes to mind when you think of this brand's early days. Let's dive in and discover how it all began. You step into this space, and instantly, the air feels thick with history, like walking into a physical embodiment of a myth. This is where the nascent whispers of Apple's birth began. Not the sleek, polished narrative you know today, but the raw, uncertain energy of a suburban garage. It's a scene straight out of folklore, yet grounded in circuit boards and solder fumes. You trace the outline of what might have been an early, clunky version of the Apple I motherboard abandoned on a workbench, feeling the rough solder points, a tangible connection to that moment of creation. Here, the fundamental divergence in philosophy between Wozniak's open hardware ethos and Jobs' burgeoning vision of a closed, controlled experience was already present from day one, a tension baked into the very first prototypes. The smell of old electronics hangs in the air, mingling with the faint, steady hum you'd expect in a forgotten storage unit. Brand historians still debate whether this early philosophical split was an inevitable clash of personalities or the necessary friction that sparks innovation. The emotional shift is palpable, moving from pure hopeful creation to the first hint of internal friction and competing desires. And here, the distinctive, almost musical boot-up chime of an early Apple machine echoes faintly, but it sounds slightly off-key, carrying a sense of something already incomplete. Perhaps even a bit broken. This initial split in vision hints at deeper rifts to come, conflicts that will define and nearly destroy the company before it reinvents itself. Building on the chaotic energy of the garage, you follow the paper trail that leads away from makeshift workbenches and towards the gleaming, often sterile, first corporate offices. You trade the scent of solder and cardboard for the thick, slightly musty smell of 1,000 faded memo papers. Here, the clicking sound of a mechanical keyboard in an empty conference room echoes differently than the clatter of tools. Sunlight catches dust motes drifting lazily over forgotten user manuals piled high, a stark visual contrast to the earlier improvisation. The challenge now is immense, translating raw counterculture energy into a polished, marketable product line. The success of the Apple II proves it's possible, but the ambition grows. You see the intense effort poured into the Lisa, a technically advanced machine that becomes notoriously expensive. Then comes the Macintosh, intended to be the more accessible revolution. This is where the idealism of creation begins to curdle into corporate maneuvering and political battles. You witness tense boardroom demos where the familiar boot-up chime sounds, sometimes crisp, sometimes faltering, a sound fighting to be heard over doubt and dissent. The emotional shift is palpable. Market pressures replace pure passion. The major historical turning point arrives, the infamous power struggle with CEO John Sculley. Steve Jobs isn't portrayed here as a heroic exile, but rather experiencing a painful corporate rejection, a forced departure from the company he co-founded. It's a gut-wrenching period. Brand historians still debate whether the friction of this era was necessary growing pain or a tragic diversion. The immense financial and emotional cost of these early struggles subtly hints at the vulnerability that will plague the company when a truly dominant competitor eventually emerges. Building on the restless innovation of those early days, the narrative leaps to 1984. The Macintosh arrives, not with a whimper, but a roar. This isn't just a product launch, it's a psychological declaration of war on the corporate establishment, symbolized by IBM, the industry's big blue giant. You are thrust into this moment of pure, aggressive defiance. The centerpiece is the 1984 commercial, a cultural bombshell aired during the Super Bowl. Behind the scenes, this ad wasn't a guaranteed hit. It was a desperate, high-stakes gamble to capture lightning in a bottle. Brand historians still debate whether the intense internal battles over airing that specific, highly metaphorical ad nearly saw the company sell off the coveted airtime instead. Yet it aired. Imagine the scene, the grainy, slightly distorted quality of old broadcast tapes, the palpable, tense silence in millions of rooms just before the ad played during Super Bowl XVIII. Then the explosion of imagery and sound, followed by the visceral, nationwide reaction, a mixture of awe at the spectacle and utter confusion for many about what they'd just seen. The iconic Macintosh boot-up chime becomes the sound of this rebellion, played loudly, confidently. But even then, there's an underlying fragility. That chime is followed by a silence, representing the lack of sustained momentum after this initial explosive burst. The aggressive confidence begins to shift towards the dawning, sobering realization of the sheer scale and relentless nature of the PC world they'd challenged. This intense focus on image, on winning the advertising war, like a quick guerrilla strike, rather than the grinding battle for raw market share or strategic platform building, subtly sets the stage for future difficulties. When the novelty fades and the war becomes about features, compatibility, and price, the initial roar might not be enough for the long haul. Following the intense growth and pivotal shifts we just explored, you enter a period that feels less like a vibrant journey and more like a long, barren desert trek. After a foundational figure departs, the company, much like a legendary band losing its lead singer, struggles desperately to find its rhythm. These are the wilderness years, marked by a confusing series of often baffling product decisions, a steady decline in market share that felt unstoppable, and a desperate, often awkward search for a new identity. This isn't just a temporary dip. It's a prolonged crisis of direction that lasted for years. A prime, albeit painful, example is the doomed, massively delayed development of the Copland operating system. Pitched internally for years as the revolutionary leap forward that would redefine computing, it became irretrievably mired in feature creep, internal politics, and missed deadlines. Ultimately scrapped entirely, having consumed vast resources and dashed countless hopes. Analysts continue to question the strategic reasoning behind allowing this ambitious project to spiral unchecked for so long, seeing it as a prime symbol of deep dysfunction and a company truly adrift. Imagine stumbling upon a faded, slightly crumpled internal memo from this time. It outlines a completely abandoned, bizarre branding strategy, revealing the depth of the corporate identity crisis in stark terms. A desperate, almost panicked attempt to redefine itself from the ground up, only to discard the idea entirely, showcasing the profound confusion gripping the organization. The sensory experience here is one of palpable decline and neglect. You run your hand over the cheap, brittle plastic of forgotten peripherals gathering dust in storerooms nobody visits. The software interfaces feel frustratingly slow, clunky, unresponsive, a step backward. You might hear the distant, annoying buzz of a fax machine printing yet another piece of bad news about dwindling sales figures or project cancellations. The emotional landscape is dominated by a feeling of profound confusion, a palpable loss of direction, and the unsettling sense of being truly adrift without a clear purpose. The familiar boot-up chime, once a fanfare of innovation, is almost entirely absent here, or perhaps you hear it only on derelict machines gathering dust in forgotten corners of old office buildings, their screens dark and dusty, sounding tinny and broken, a ghostly, sad echo of past relevance. The depth of this decline, the sheer mess and confusion of it all, makes the idea of an eventual turnaround feel almost fantastical, hinting strongly at the hidden, drastic measures or strokes of sheer luck that would eventually be required merely for the company's survival. As the brand reels, adrift and rudderless, you trace the improbable path back from the brink. It starts with an unlikely handshake, the next acquisition, bringing Steve Jobs back into the fold. This isn't just a return, it's a reclamation, a desperate bid for survival. The air is thick with tension, hope warring with deep-seated skepticism. Then comes the first bold stroke of color in a monochrome world, the iMac. You remember the vibrant, almost jarring hues, Bondi blue, tangerine, strawberry, standing out against beige towers. You might even recall the smooth, controversial curve of the hockey puck mouse, an early ergonomic stumble in the rush to redefine design. The soundscape shifts too, the hopeful, whirring groan of dial-up internet connecting in a late 90s office, now often heralding a splash of Apple color on the screen. This is the era of Think Different. Brand historians still debate the true human cost of this turnaround, the internal battles fought, the creative compromises made under immense pressure to deliver salvation. It's not just marketing genius. It's defiance born of desperation. The emotional shift is palpable, from fear to a defiant, almost manic energy, yet the underlying tension remains. Failure is still a ghost, and past betrayals cast long shadows. The boot-up chime motif returns here, clearer and stronger than ever, a triumphant sound. But to ears that have heard the history, it carries the echo of every struggle, every failure that preceded it. The sound of survival, scarred but resolute. This intense focus on integrated design and controlled experiences while delivering immediate success subtly lays the groundwork for new kinds of corporate control and user dependency that will define future eras. Looking out at the modern landscape, you see the sleek, ubiquitous devices born from this turbulent history dominating your view. This final section isn't a victory lap. It's a quiet contemplation of the enduring legacy of the Mac versus PC war and the often unseen cost of achieving iconic status. The cool glass of a modern device screen feels smooth beneath your fingers, its operation almost silent, a stark contrast to the whirring fans and clanking drives of the past. There's a sense of awe at the sheer power and influence the brand now wields, mixed with an undeniable unease about the disconnect between this seamless user experience and the complex, often opaque, corporate machine behind it. Building on the historical journey we've taken, you reflect on how that initial clash of philosophies, the open versus the closed, the counterculture rebel versus the corporate giant, and the subsequent battles didn't just shape a company. They fundamentally sculpted the digital world itself, often in uncomfortable ways, determining what technology feels like, how we interact with it, and who controls the keys to the kingdom. What was lost in the pursuit of polish? What ideals were forgotten in the wilderness years? And what unresolved tensions still lie beneath the surface of today's frictionless interfaces? Analysts continue to question the ethical implications of such centralized control, even as users flock to the convenience it offers. The familiar boot-up chime, once a hard-won sound of success in the early days, is now a sound millions hear daily, taken completely for granted. But for you, having traced its origins through struggle, silence, and seismic shifts, it asks a silent question. It's a subtle dissonance beneath the harmony of seamless integration. What parts of the original dream, the fiery spirit of the early conflict, or the painful lessons of the lean years are buried beneath this sound? Is it truly just a chime of triumph, or is it a reminder of the ghosts in the machine, the moments of doubt, the pivots driven by necessity, the people and projects left behind? The story isn't over. It's just entered a new, perhaps more unsettling phase, where the questions are quieter, but the stakes are higher than ever. And so, as the digital world continues to evolve at breakneck speed, powered in part by the engines we've explored, we reflect on the key takeaways from this saga: the power of vision, the brutal reality of market forces, the resilience required to survive failure, and the paradox of mainstream success, changing the very essence of the Rebel brand. Its long-term legacy is undeniable, its products woven into the fabric of modern life, achieving a level of cultural symbolism that transcends mere technology. The lessons learned? Perhaps they speak to the constant tension between purity and pragmatism, innovation and iteration, control and accessibility. This journey reminds us that every sleek surface, every intuitive interface is built on layers of human drama, strategic battles, and moments of both brilliance and despair. And maybe, just maybe, the soul of a brand is never in its product, but in the people, stories, and stumbles that shape it.